Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
All right, and for this roundtable, I am here with the usual suspects. Joshua Cutchin, Red Pill Junkie, and Michael Hughes. Hi, guys.
Excelsior.
Greetings.
Yeah, it feels like a mafia gang right now.
I think we're more the unusual suspects than the usual suspects.
You are actually all available on the same night.
Yeah, this is big.
All right. Well, we're going to deal with some questions that were thrown to us from some patrons. But first, there was an interesting story that broke, I think it was this week, wasn't it? Let's see, 29th of November. Mm-hmm. China's first astronaut reveals mysterious knocking on his capsule left him spooked while in orbit. And this comes from the Daily Mail in the UK, but it's been, I know Coast to Coast I think actually may have interviewed the guy. And a few, it's been posted elsewhere, obviously. The sound of a hammer hitting an iron bucket left China's first astronaut feeling nervous and worried during his maiden voyage into space. Astronaut Yang Liwei made the revelations in a recent interview while talking about the strange noises while on board the Shenzhen 5 spaceship during a 21-hour mission in 2003. Although Liwei said he didn't hear the mysterious sound after returning to Earth, other astronauts aboard the Shenzhou 6 and Shenzhou 7 have also reported hearing a similar, if not the same, banging.
Let me in. It's Dave Bowman still floating around out there, I guess.
Yeah. It's it's definitely a creepy sounding story, but I would the first thing that comes to mind to me is that maybe it's something in the space station itself, like settling or adjusting in some way and making that noise.
Yeah, that would be my first reaction too. If houses do that, certainly space stations do, right?
Out of thermal dilation. Yeah, I think that I read. I listened to old Mysterious Universe podcasts, and they discussed this kind of like a Marvel effect that some people. I think it was in Singapore or some East Asia country. That people report this kind of like mysterious sound, something like a little marble, like dropping and move out of from their walls or from their ceiling, And I myself have experienced that event. I think that is an effect of structure like settling in the night, after movement, after thermal dilation or whatever. But it's probably if you listen to such a thing out in space.
Yeah. And he says it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship, but sounded like someone is knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer.
Now, I think it would also be interesting to sort of view this through, conceptually, the space program, if it were to be extrapolated into the future, would be sort of modeled after the maritime model, right? You would think about ships and crew. It's interesting how this really does parallel some maritime urban legends that you hear about people being entombed in the walls of the ship and banging to get out. Have you ever heard those old sailor stories?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting, like in terms of a mythic motif, that you could view it as possibly a continuation of that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there's people throwing around, it's aliens, but why would aliens be knocking on the ship?
Exactly.
Now, what's interesting here is that this reminds me also of all these tales of weird happenings experienced by Russian cosmonauts out in the Mir station. I think it was in the 1970s or so, of cosmonauts seeing like humanoids out of the space station that weren't even using any kind of like astronaut suit. You know, and these beings apparently were trying to communicate with the cosmonauts and warning them that it wasn't still their time to be out in space, right? So, like there is this idea that, you know, but that is also like segueing or in parallel with the concept or the legend that the reason why we didn't return to the moon was because basically someone like kicked us out of it, you know. So some kind of like force or intelligence that is trying to prevent us from spreading out into space. And not to say that these stories are necessarily true, but the fact that these sorts of things are reported by Russian cosmonauts, you know that they were part of a communist country, and now these Chinese astronaut who is, you know, a member of communist China. You know, it's interesting, you know, how these things happen with these groups of astronauts and not with astronauts from the International Space Station.
True.
Yeah, I mean, there was also, I think it was the Apollo 10 astronauts who heard strange music, you know, when they were on the far side of the moon, coming through their, you know, their audio equipment.
Right.
And other, you know, I've heard here and there over the years, like, again, like you were saying, RPJ, the cosmonauts, there's a lot of weird stories associated with things they heard and things they saw, which seemed, you know, really weird. So, you know, the idea that this is something, you know, I mean, usually astronauts and, you know, engineers and all are pretty aware when there's if there's a stray piece of metal banging around. You know, it seems like something that would be deeply disconcerting to them. Right. So while my first thought too is, oh, it's just something clanging, you know, something banging. You know, maybe that's not the case. You know, maybe it's you know, maybe it is a little more poltergeisty, because, you know, if you're hearing something banging like that would, even if you're not afraid that it's some alien spook, you know, outside your craft wanting to come in and play, it would still be unnerving for the fact that there's something really loud banging on this, you know, this piece of metal I'm floating around in.
I wouldn't think so much the thing would be banging as much as maybe the metal is settling or adjusting and making a banging sound as it does.
Yeah, certainly possible. But you would, I mean, these guys are pretty smart people, you know, engineer wise. Yeah, I would love to hear what an engineer has to say about it.
Yeah. You know? And of course, he didn't hear these sounds when he came back to Earth, which of course just suggests it's not him. But we also don't know what effect, you know, being in space could potentially have. Maybe those sounds didn't exist. Maybe something was, maybe some kind of space ray exposure was causing him to mildly hallucinate a banging sound. As a matter of fact, Kundalini can cause you to hear all kinds of sounds that aren't there, and they seem perfectly real. And some of them are banging sounds.
Right.
I mean, not to say that's what it is, but we don't know. I mean, the fact that he only heard them up there and other astronauts have heard them up there, we don't know for sure unless it's recorded whether or not it's a real sound.
You're right.
So, but it's an interesting story nonetheless.
Yeah.
And maybe,
for sure.
Maybe it's space vampires who need to be invited in. That's why they're knocking.
Space black-eyed kids. we just want to borrow your lunar lander. That's all we want to do, mister.
Yeah.
Well, that would be a story. All right. So the last time I think I had Joshua and Miguel on, we had Lobo on, and we were talking about the concept of fear and stuff, speaking of black-eyed kids. But Mike wasn't with us. So, Mike, tell us, what scares you the most?
Oh, jeez. Do I have to say it? Because then it might really happen. No, lots of things scare me. I mean, you know, there's the run-of-the-mill scary things like, you know, disease and, you know, getting hit by a bus or, you know, that sort of thing. Something bad happening to my kids or my wife or one of my friends, that kind of thing. But the deeply scary stuff. I used to have dreams, nightmares, that always kind of ran the same way. I don't really have them as much anymore, but it was always people I knew were somehow turning against me, either supernaturally becoming demons or something like that. And I was always, one of the only ones left, in this. I guess maybe I watched the Omega Man and stuff like that too much, too often when I was a kid. But they were terrifying because, to think that people you're close to just suddenly switch into something that wants to hurt you. That was always a really terrifying thing that just, for whatever reason would erupt into my consciousness.
Damn it, he's discovered our plot.
I knew it. It's all set up. Yeah, the idea too that people are just sort of conspiring around you. That sort of paranoia. And I guess I always love maybe a lot of '70s movies were like that too. Where, like I just recently saw one that I'd kind of forgotten about, but it just happened to be on a TV station at my friend's house. Let's Scare Jessica to Death. You guys ever remember that one? It was like a '70s. It's not a great movie, but it's a woman who's mentally ill, and she's recently, got out of the institution where she was staying, and she's with her husband, this group of people, and slowly you begin to understand that they're conspiring against her. It's this sort of vampiric thing, and or Rosemary's Baby. There was all that whole sort of genre of film where it's an innocent person slowly finding out that everything is not what it seems. That was the real scary thing for a big part of my life. I'm still terrified. I've talked a couple times on the show about that time I asked to see some things in the sky and they showed up. I'm still a little too terrified to do that again if I'm by myself in the woods or some really remote location. I feel like it's intellectually I should just do it. I should just go for it. But when put on the spot, I think maybe I just don't want to invite whatever those things are.
Not only that, but I would think possibly that sort of hesitation would stop it from working anyway.
Maybe, or it might fuel it. I mean, that just that terror, that I'm feeling, even just thinking about it, might give it an extra jolt of whatever juice that it runs on. But I'm still, I guess I'm like most people, scared of the usual stuff. But
sure.
But then being of our ilk, lots of other potential paranormal stuff is still pretty scary, even though I seek it out. There's the part of me that see, I'm kind of sneaking towards it and running away from it as fast as I can.
Yeah. Well, it's that thing that I'm always so fond of saying, like, it's one thing to talk about all these things when it's 2 p.m. outside and the sun is out. It's another thing to wake up in the middle of the night and look out your window and be like, what would it be like to see no, I don't want to see a gray pop its head up. No, hell no.
Exactly.
I occasionally will be in my store and think, what if I look out the back window and there's a Bigfoot standing there? How would I react? And I really don't know the answer to it, honestly. Because it might be saying that'll scare you, but at the same time, will my sense? There's lots of things that should have scared me that haven't. So I don't know.
I think it would depend on the way that the Bigfoot looks. Like if it's some of these like Harry and the Henderson types that they talk about, that would be fine. But there was, did y'all ever see the really horrifying artist reconstructions of what some people think Neanderthals might have looked like? I think it was for a documentary called Them and Us. You ever see that? It's horrifying. I'll send a link.
So.
I'll send a link because if you would see this in the middle of the night, it would freaking terrify you. I'll send that your way.
Maybe that's why our ancestors ate them all.
Yeah.
They were just so hideously terrifying. Let's kill them and eat them.
Well,
but I think that some of our ancestors mated with them. So
right, yeah, true. Mate with them, then kill them and eat them.
Yeah, so basically, if I recommend anybody check this out, because some people have said that this is what their Sasquatch encounters looked like, but it's basically a reinterpretation of what Neanderthal man might have looked like, just based on some alternative forensic interpretations. So it's pretty horrifying. I'll send the links on over.
Yeah, please do.
Interesting. So we have a bunch of questions that we're still going through from patrons, and we're going to go through a few of James's questions, because he threw us some interesting ones I think we can handle off the top of our head. Some of these we're going to have to actually do some deep thinking about to answer. But one of his questions, he was asking about fear, what scares us the most, and I think we've covered that. He wants to know, what are the things in our world that really make you sit up and say, damn, that's interesting, or just plain unbelievable?
Well, don't everybody jump in at once.
It's it's actually a pretty hard question. I mean, 'cause we deal with so much weird stuff.
Well, I mean, maybe on a really simplistic level, like, I find it interesting and fascinating that there are so many things that we think that we have locked down rather, in terms of the role that they play in our lives. Like, smell is one of those things. Like, we think that we should have figured out what smell is like. In other words, how we actually manage to process the olfactory process. But we still don't have a grasp on that. We still don't have a grasp on exactly the exact mechanisms behind how we sleep. I mean, it's things like that I find really interesting.
So do I. I think one of the things I find interesting is how little we know about about space. How much we act like we know, but we know so actual little. We're basing on inferences from other things. And one of the first people I ever talked to, I think the first person I ever talked to about this stuff, I actually did it on my music show, was Walter Cruttenton, who has written The Lost Star of Space and Lost Star of something. I want to say Space and Time, but I don't know if that's it. But he talks about the possibility of us being in a binary system that's on a very long orbit. That actually explains precession. And the more I looked into it, the more his data actually holds up. And it's really fascinating to me that one of the suspects could be the star Sirius. And right down to things like, there are people who have determined how fast our galaxy is moving. Well, it's exactly how fast it would have to be moving in order to rotate around Sirius.
Interesting. It's one of those things that make you go, huh, interesting.
I mean, it might not be accurate, but what if we really are in a binary system and we just don't know, because the time period is 24,000 years for one rotation. We have history that goes back 8,000 years.
Yeah, that seems like a completely logical possibility. I mean, if we haven't observed it, how would we really have any idea?
Yeah, without any written history or anything.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that I will have to disagree. That I have read in many places, and I happen to agree that we know more about space than we know about the oceans of our own planet.
True.
Right.
There's this is like a completely uncharted territory. I remember when I was a kid and I was reading all the Jacques Cousteau books. I was thinking that in the 20 years from then, we will be starting to live in underwater cities. And as I grow older, it seems far more likely that we will have first some kind of colony on Mars than a colony, at the bottom of the ocean. And the thing that fascinates me about the ocean is, the possibility that there are things down there that we really have no idea they exist. Remember, there's this famous legend about the bloop sound that was, registered by this echograph machine or something like that. And recently there was an explanation for that. Apparently it was some kind of tectonic movement or something, but I think the reason why the story caught on and captured the imagination of the public is because we've always been fascinated about the idea of sea monsters, these creatures that are down there, leviathans, and megalodons, all these extinct or things that we believe that are extinct, but maybe they aren't. So to me, that's the kind of things that fascinate me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting because today, sort of along those lines, I read about the discovery of they call them bees of the sea, and they've determined that they're like some of the sea vegetation is actually pollinated, in a sense, by certain creatures in the sea. Which is completely brand new concept. That there are, just like bees pollinate plants, there are actually, whatever these things are actually pollinating the vegetation under the sea. Like, wow, you would think we may have figured that out by now, but again, that there's just so much. I mean, it really is the closest alien world to all of us. So I completely agree with that. Yeah, that's.
One of the things that definitely has been giving me pause in the past probably year or so that I didn't really appreciate the breadth of and the depth of, but is just how really immersed star lore is into our existence. I mean, I think your interview that you just did with David Matheson, Soraya, was fantastic. It's a wonderful perspective in how this is the bedrock of so much of our belief in mythology, and we don't even realize it, and we're swimming in this sea of symbolism constantly, and we don't even stop to process that. Most of us aren't even aware of it.
Mm-hmm. And that also goes back to procession. And why is procession something that our ancestors felt was so important? And if it's tied in with a second sun, that would make sense, rather than it just moving. The fact that it moves and something changes in a drastic way at some point.
Yeah, the star lore thing is interesting, but also when you think back to our remotest ancestors up until the invention of electricity and lamp lighting and things like that. I mean, the sky was our giant 5K television, and I mean, it was there. It was in your face in the evenings when you walked away from that campfire or whatever, and it was just so omnipresent for people, and we're so distant to that now. I live in a city. I walk out, I look up in the sky, there might be 3 stars visible. But we stare at our TV screens, at our computers, stuff like that. But people, they watched the processions. They watched it. Just by being out and about. See what they just had such a better conception of the movement of stars and the patterns, asterisms, and all that stuff. And again, I haven't listened to your show about that, Soraya, but I know Gordon White's whole Starships book is traces all that stuff too. It's it's really interesting. Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, Josh.
But at the same time, you can't actually see precession happening. I mean, it moves 1 degree every 72 years. So in order to know precession is happening, you have to have some kind of scientific method there.
Yeah, you need tools, you need measurements.
And you need time. Yeah. You need time, too. That's the other thing.
Right.
Yeah.
More than a lifetime worth.
Mm-hmm.
Something else sort of building off the star thing, too, and I've been thinking about this as well, is this is something that a lot of us, esotericists don't think is that big of a deal because we've been aware of this for a while. But in terms of the general populace, like the degree to which the first law of hermeneutics holds up across all of reality, this as above, so below sort of thing is startling. And if I could get the just people that I meet on the street or just friends of mine to really perceive how consistent that is, I think people would be more shocked than they realize. It does sort of have that sort of re-enchanting of the world sort of quality. It makes everything seem a little bit more wondrous when you realize that a leaf looks like a tree.
Right. And the way nebula and things are in space, very similar to patterns on the Earth and in water, and and then you get into the whole Fibonacci sequence. And,
yeah, good point.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point too. I mean that's a big mind blower to me. Like the recurring spirals in nature, and essentially just a mathematical basis of everything. Which, if I could throw in my mind blower that's sort of obsessed me for several years now, is the whole simulation hypothesis. That not and I say that not as literal that we are living in a computer simulation, but of course that's possible, but just as a metaphor for maybe thinking of how you could take it as far as God. You can extrapolate it to archons if you're in a Gnostic sort of mind frame, but the idea that we are in a simulation really makes a lot of sense in some ways.
Yes.
And what's the point in a simulation? It's to, if you look at it as simple as a game, the closest thing that we create to world simulations, it's to level up. It's to find. And what do people do in games? They find the Easter eggs, the hidden things that show the designers, intent that put into the game and things like that. And that really blows my mind. It also explains a lot of the horrible AI characters I see walking around every day. So I mean, really, when I first heard of, I think it was Nick Bostrom as the mathematician who really, kind of pushed the idea. But it really goes back to like Plato's, metaphor of the cave and everything like that. But the more I started thinking about it, it just, you can plug so many things into it. You can plug occultism. You can, the idea that certain practices or certain techniques can hack the system. The idea was, it kind of was trendy in the 90s, about hacking reality, with the whole cyberpunk thing and all. But really, there's an element of that is really fascinating to think about. That's, those of us who try to, crack some of these mysteries, that we're sort of, poking into the the glitches in the simulation and trying to find out why they're there. So that's what's kind of been banging around in my head for years now, that I still find kind of mind blowing.
That's a really good one. I do find it frustrating sometimes. Well, often, no, every time. people interpret that like through a very like humanistic, anthropocentric sort of version of like, oh, well, then that means that we're living in the Matrix. No, it doesn't. Like that's a little bit too literal of an interpretation, because just because that's the logical end result that humanity would come to, it doesn't mean that that's somehow tied into the fabric of the universe. But the concept of a simulation, I agree with you, is a really cool idea that I think could, go a long way to explaining a lot of spiritual disciplines too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of similar to the holographic universe idea, which absolutely blew my mind when I first came across it in Michael Talbot's book back in the, I want to say, late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. And there was another one written called Maya, The World is Virtual Reality. And it was actually, I forget the guy's name. He actually co-wrote the book with, names are gone, Forbidden Archaeology.
Oh, Cremo?
Yeah. He co-wrote that book with him. He actually graduated from right here in Cornell, I believe, and he was living in Binghamton till a few years before I started the show when he passed away. And when I started the show, I said, I wonder where he is. Oh, he's in Binghamton, and he's no longer with us. All right. But for my first show, I had actually had on Jim Elvich, who wrote The Universe Solved, talking about the world as virtual reality. And, he came on saying, I don't necessarily believe this is true, but, there's some evidence here that's hard to explain away. So, there could be, it's not so much that we're living in the Matrix, but that reality seems to behave as a computer program in a lot of ways.
So, Ryan, have you ever interviewed Anthony Peake?
No, but I hope to sometime soon.
Yeah, because he has some really interesting concepts about the Greek concept of the daemon and the eidolon, So he uses a very astute metaphor of video games. How if you are playing a video game and you are moving the character in the video game, so the character will be the eidolon, and then you go into a level and you die, and your character is respawned. The character has no concept that of what just happened, that he was killed in a previous life, but you, the daemon, do, and you have this a bit of information about what's going to happen, so you kind of like move the character, the avatar, the eidolon, in such a way as to try to avoid what happened on the previous life.
Oh, I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the moment that I listened to that, it made so much sense, So, yeah, maybe it's something like that. Maybe that's why some people, get in contact with what they think is their higher self, or some people who report, hearing some inner voice that effectively averted them from suffering, an accident, or making a choice that would have been catastrophic or something, not getting on board a plane that ends up crashing, something like that, So maybe that is kind of like the same concept.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that comes to mind that's always kind of been in the unbelievable category for me all my life is, why are we even here?
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah.
Because no matter how you look at it, whether you take a religious viewpoint or you take a scientific viewpoint, there's no good reason we should exist, or any of this should exist. It's kind of like we, in one form or another, we had to come from something, and where did that something come from? And you could argue, well, it's not a matter of past and present at some point because you're outside of time. And it's like, okay, what does that even really mean? And how do we comprehend it? I don't think we can.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that too. Just the fact that we exist, that this is happening right now. It sounds like, past the bog, man, kind of philosophizing, but it's not. No. It's not. And I think, when people first get that little, that blast of insight, or mystic realization, or whatever it is, it's like, wait a minute, where did all this come? I mean, it's actually miraculous. People are always looking for miracles, but I mean, just the fact that, I'm looking at my hand and I'm talking through this thing, and you guys exist, and at least I think you do. I mean, I've seen two of you in the flesh, but I don't know about RPJ. But yeah, it's just a simple, basic fact of existence is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think there's any real way we can wrap our brains around it. I don't think our brains are able to do that. It's the eyeball seeing itself.
Right. It's the fish in the ocean not knowing what water is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that is truly. That's one of the big questions. That's really one of the most simplest questions that still, every once in a while when I sit down and think about it, there's another similar, and this is one of those things that people either kind of get, or they think you're crazy, or they think I'm crazy when I bring it up. But I wish I could remember what book it was where I encountered it. But the fact that all of us alive right now, okay, that we're alive, if you think of time as like a train, okay, and it's moving along from past to forward, okay, the metaphor this writer used, God, maybe it'll come to me, but is that we're tied to the front of the train. We're not, we could have been born 100 years ago. But all of us who are alive right now just happen to be alive at the edge of time, right? As it's moving from the past to the future. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Or is that like another, maybe too many bong hit sort of theory?
I don't think so.
Oh, dude, it's very
Yeah.
But the fact that we, all of us right now, are literally on the edge of time. We're not dead. We're not yet to exist. We are on the edge of that train, or spaceship, or whatever you want to call it. Is kind of fascinating when you think of it that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And why are you and not me, or vice versa?
Right.
We think, oh, well, consciousness, even if you take the sort of materialistic view that consciousness arose from matter, well, why do I have an identity that's not the same as yours?
Because then I would be staying up until 6 a.m. in the morning, like you.
Or the simple one of, how do we know that the color we call red looks the same to all of us?
Yeah, I remember people in middle school trotting out that argument. At the time, I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. But after a while, that totally makes sense. Maybe, there's an internal consistency in the way that people interpret their own colors, but it doesn't map onto what we would think. Yeah.
There's no way we would know.
We do now, right? Because of Twitter address.
Yeah, well, there's that. That's a great example right there of how easily perception can be fooled.
Yeah.
Twitter. I'd almost forgotten about that. Thanks, RPG.
Yeah, I wish I would have forgotten about it.
Oh.
All right, so let's look at James' next question here, which was, well, who do you guys listen to and respect besides the run-of-the-mill standard answers?
Well, I'm going to take this moment to get in there right quick and get my nose all brown. I've said this 1,000 times, Soraya, but if I wasn't on Where Did the Road Go, I would still listen to Where Did the Road Go.
Well, thank you.
I came into this as a fan of the show, and my appreciation for the perspective that's consistently supported on this show, the true open-minded skepticism and positive agnosticism is something that I salute. So I'm going to go ahead and get that out of the way. I've done that for everybody. Now we can move on.
Excellent. I 100% agree. I would also say the Daily Grail has such a great source of information, and Greg and RPJ and the rest of the folks who have kept that going for so long, and every daily installment is just chock full of stuff that can keep you intrigued for hours, following all those links. It's a phenomenal resource.
Well, what can I say? One of the reasons why I'm here, because I was lucky enough, although probably I shouldn't say that luck had anything to do with it, that I managed to find my way into the Daily Grail, and that Greg invited me to contribute. And at first I was like, no. I was finding excuses to refuse, but in the end, I decided to say yes, and it was probably one of the best decisions that I've made in my life. So, yeah, kudos to Greg. He's still, soldiering on, trying to continue with the site. It's basically a labor of love because, I can say this, there's zero profit in it, from him. Actually, I think he loses money, by maintaining the site. There's a couple of people who, actually try to contribute, to that, share a few dollars once in a while. But yeah, it is actually a miracle that places like the Daily Grail exists, and hopefully they will continue to exist many years to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he puts out some great books and magazines, and so please, if it, support it. Just like support Where Did the Road Go? Go support these labors of love. They're not huge money makers, if money makers at all, but they, they're important, and please buy stuff.
And I think it's important to have as many varying opinions out there as possible. So the more things that get going that have that open-minded way of looking at things, the better.
Somebody else that speaking of the Daily Grail, I'm thinking about really, underappreciated online presences. The Anomalist is a wonderful website that's sort of an aggregator for a lot of things. And even though I don't believe Patrick Weege is necessarily the person who compiles all the links, I have a great deal of respect for Patrick. I mean, this is the house that Patrick built. I was aware of Patrick before I started my professional relationship with him. I used to read books that he co-authored as in middle school and stuff. But in terms of someone who has a keen eye, and I'm not just saying this because I'm brown nosing again, I guess, but I'm not just saying this because I have books that I've published with him. But like in terms of someone who has a keen eye and who is like somebody who has been around the scene for a very long time and has chosen to kind of not necessarily put himself into the spotlight. Patrick is a really, really intriguing, cool guy. I had the pleasure of meeting him back at Fort Fest this summer, and he's someone whose opinion I respect like all day long. Absolutely,
I would agree with that.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's see. I'm trying to. The thing is, like, if we're looking at like authors and people, they're the obvious big ones like Vallée and stuff. I'm always fascinated with the way Jacques Vallée looks at stuff, as well as the fact that he was not afraid to change his perspective and even go against things he said in the past. He's truly open-minded about this stuff. I think Graham Hancock's kind of in that category as well. If it wasn't for Graham Hancock, I probably wouldn't be doing this show today. It was getting into his stuff that eventually led me to this point. I have yet to have him on the show, but I also haven't asked yet. And I think he's actually on his way to the pipeline thing at the moment.
Oh, wow.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
You mentioned Graham Hancock, and I just saw him on with Randall Carlson again on the Joe Rogan show. And Joe Rogan is someone who I have come to respect a great deal as well.
Here,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember him back on like playing like the doofus bro on news radio.
I loved that character.
I love that show and I love that character. And to think that he's evolved into like this ersatz Terrence McKenna almost. That's a little bit probably too high praise, but like some of the things and some of the thought that he puts into things is actually really, really insightful. So he's somebody whose opinion I've come to value a lot more than I ever would have thought that I did.
And
sure, the fact that he reaches so many people.
Yes.
Millions of downloads, and he is the reason why, millennials hear about someone like Randall Carlson or Graham Hancock. So I think that 50 years from now, history will talk about the influence that the Joe Rogan podcast had in shaping the consciousness of all these new generations.
And Randall Carlson's another one like that. Like every time I've talked to Randall, I've just been blown away by the amount of knowledge he has. Anyone, he's not going to be right about everything, but boy, does he have a deep knowledge of all this different stuff. And I remember the first time I heard him was on Red Ice Radio. And I just sat there mesmerized. I'm like, who is this guy? I need to talk to him. Holy crap. Talking about cycles, catastrophe, and all this other stuff. Also, and I'm sure that Joshua will agree wholeheartedly, I've completely blanked on his name. And the name of his book. I do this all the time.
Oh yeah, that guy.
Is this Uncle Gordy? Is that who we're talking about?
No. Oh my God! I can't believe I can't come up with his name
Patrick
at all.
Harper.
Thank you, Patrick Harper.
Yeah, Patrick Harper.
Yeah. He's phenomenal.
Uncle Patrick.
Reading Demonic Reality was just one of those things where I just sat back and went, "Wow." Same with George Hansen.
George, I was just going to say, I read those books around the same time.
So did
together.
I.
Yeah.
And and Jeff Kripal,
Yes.
These people that don't like do the hard hitting, reptilians have infiltrated our society in their underground bases. They don't do that circuit. It's the people who are talking about this in a really mature way that really pull me into their orbit.
Also, Kenneth Ring.
Yeah.
Although he didn't do a lot, the stuff that he did was important, and a lot of people have just never even paid attention. There was Mike Cleland actually put up in his podcast a conversation between Kenneth Ring and now I'm gonna have to look because I can't remember his Robert Anton Wilson, I believe. And that was really interesting because it was him interviewing Kenneth Ring, and this was back in the early 90s, and they were right, at the point that we are now in a lot of ways. Let me just double check that if it was Terence McKenna. I'm sorry, it was Terence McKenna.
Terrence.
Yeah.
Saint Terence.
Well, yeah, and the thing about I was just about thinking about Terence McKenna because like I know that we have dropped his name on a lot of these podcasts, and there are probably people who are sort of aware of him. But like, if you are interested in these sort of subjects, and you're listening to a show like Where Did the Road Go that deals in matters of interpretation and in matters of the way that the reality is constructed, you have no reason to not avail yourself of every single thing he has ever spoken, because you can find it. You can find it all on the internet, and if you just take like a month in the summer and just plow through those recordings, it really does change the way that you think, and it really does. I mean, it was been one of the most influential people I've ever listened to.
Yeah. And he's so entertaining, it's voice that, he's got this Irish gift of gab, and he's just so funny and entertaining, and he's funny and entertaining while he's like cracking your skull wide open, and
have any of you ever? I've only seen bits and pieces. I've never actually. Maybe I've sat through like 2 or 3 episodes. But have any of you ever seen American Dad?
No. I mean, I've seen a few minutes, but I hated it because I hate Family Guy and all those type of things. I know.
I'm on board with you too. But sometimes I wonder if it wasn't like this deliberate choice to make Roger the Alien sound like Terence McKenna, because sometimes he says things that they sort of sound like something that Terence would say.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyone else you want to?
Yeah,
you guys want to throw out?
This is a little off that question, but since Terence came up, you guys may have seen that the Johns Hopkins psilocybin team that I wrote the first feature article about their work with psilocybin and mysticism. They just came out with another paper in the Journal of Psychopharmacology about using psilocybin to treat people with cancer. Not to cure their cancer or anything, but to ease the anxiety that goes along with having a cancer diagnosis. And they've been at this for 11 years. They finally published a paper, and I encourage everybody to go find it and read it. It's really fascinating. And because I know these folks so well, I've heard the stories over the years. They worked with people, counseled them, took them through the whole psilocybin experience, worked with them afterwards, and the changes in these people were so remarkable. Because a lot of times when you're fighting, a disease that is likely to kill you, you tend to fall apart psychologically and push away your loved ones and things like that. And the dramatic turnabout in so many of these people, who just suddenly they are the ones who are comforting their family, instead of the other way around. I mean, it's just remarkable personal stories. And you don't get all of that in a scientific paper, obviously. But I mean, I think people are going to write about the personal stories. And there have been a couple of paranormal, because I talked to some of the people who, this one woman, her father had been in the study, and she was just, the stories she was telling me were making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I mean, just these paranormal events that happened, either after the psilocybin experience or during the experience or after, her father died, and, we getting phone calls and like messages that have been recorded, a year before that's of his voice that suddenly appeared on her phone and things like that. So it's really, it's mind-blowing stuff. And the paper really, it's very straightforward science, measurements of people's behavioral changes and stuff like that. But you can read between the lines and see how powerful this substance is in healing people, so And there's a whole this particular issue. It's the latest issue of the Journal of Psychopharmacology. It's all about psychedelics. So if that's something you're interested in, could read the whole journal issue is just really incredible. I mean, we're really at a renaissance of understanding consciousness and the effects of these substances.
Yeah, here. That's it. Really is the dawn of a new day in that field. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to the next question here. James had a bunch of them. He tossed to us, and they were all pretty good. What keeps you guys from going crazy looking for answers in fields where most of the times the answers are not what you would think, or maybe never be answered? And I would also add, it's also, a lot of these fields, people really just kind of lose it when they're in them for too long. My answer right up front is humor. Have a sense of humor about things, about yourself, about the universe, because if you don't, that's where things start to go really wrong.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
I agree completely.
Yeah. That and an unending well of cynicism. That helps.
Yeah, it's that razor's edge, that you have to tread between, and it's so easy to either fall off either side, or to just, like, I guess, have the razor just slice you in half that you're walking on. But it's, it's a, I don't recommend, a lot of people immersing. I think, people who aren't interested in this stuff, maybe kind of ignorance is bliss in a lot of ways, and maybe things are a little easier when you have certitude and you're not questioning everything and always asking big questions. But man, it's it's a fraught road. Where did the road go? Sometimes I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm still on the road, if I've fallen into a ditch. But to balance that desire to believe something and that desire to disbelieve something.
Yeah. Joshua.
Yeah, so for me, a couple of things. So I every now and then I think about the amount of things that I've taken in and trying to figure out what all this means, all this, just esoterica in general. And I think you have to be interested in so many different aspects of it. As soon as you close yourself off to saying, well, I'm into UFOs, but I'm not going to look into what magic's all about. And I'm into Bigfoot. I'm not going to look into what fairy folk are all about. You really do stunt your understanding of the big picture, because I was thinking the other day, like, whenever somebody asks me what I think about these things, I kind of just don't even want to talk about it. Because there's so much to unload on them about the interconnected nature of these things, and why, for example, magic is important to talking about ufology, why consciousness is important to all these things. But it's like a 3-hour conversation, right?
Yeah.
So
3 days, man.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm not really sure if that's really how germane that is to the question, but it does get disheartening. And I guess the thing that sort of keeps me grounded is that I know that. I mean, there are a few things that you'll find me say that I know about paranormal phenomena, but I know that there is some sort of reality to these things. And regardless of what anybody thinks, regardless of what the true nature of it is, regardless of whether or not we find an answer, I know that there is a very strong kernel of truth that has something to do with who we are as a species on this planet, who we are as conscious beings. I know that exists, and that will remain inviolable no matter what happens. And that's sort of what keeps me grounded, because it's not, it's not my place to solve these things. Maybe I have a role to play in helping shed some further light on it, but to get quote unquote the answer is probably not the reason that I was put on this planet.
Red Pill?
I don't know if I can answer the question, of the answer in order to not to become, insane, because I admit that I am crazy. So that's another one. Okay.
You're the luchador who does not wrestle.
Exactly. I mean, I think that,
he wrestles with reality, man.
Exactly. It's something of a joke here that I say that in order to retain your sanity in a place like Mexico City, you have to be a little crazy. And maybe that also applies to the 4G realm. But one advice I could give is that I found the maybe logic proposed by Robert Anton Wilson incredibly helpful. I mean, John Keel said it best: belief is the enemy. The problem here with the 4G realm is that there are so many people who are so certain about what they believe, that what they particularly believe in is true.
Here. Yep.
That the rest of their lives will be devoted to try to defend those beliefs against the a-holes who try to contest it. And the problem with that is that I see that as not only wasted energy, but also the wasted opportunity to grow, because the moment that you change your beliefs, or you accept that maybe you could be wrong, is that when you are ready for another step in your personal evolution. So what Robert Anton Wilson proposed with the maybe logic is to discard all beliefs, to try to live your life, as Whitley Strieber once said, with a high degree of uncertainty, which is really difficult, but it pays off. So you end up becoming a very, very skeptical and very, open-minded at the same time. You go and say, Bigfoot is probably some kind of like undiscovered primate roaming the forest of the Pacific Northwest. Maybe. Or Bigfoot is some kind of like paranormal creature that can phase in and out of our reality at will. Maybe. Or Bigfoot is just some kind of misidentification that is also the product of folklore, hoaxes, and mass popular culture. Maybe. And you go and you juggle all these concepts into your life, and you refrain yourself for as long as you can of trying to put or draw a line in the sand and saying, okay, this is where I draw the sand. This is where I think is the ultimate reality. There are a few things in which I think that I have drawn that line in the sand. One is that I really feel or suspect, as Robert Anton Wilson will say, he often said, I don't believe in anything, but I suspect many things.
Right.
Yeah, the same is with me. I suspect that UFOs are real, but at the same time, and like Soraya said, if UFOs are real, that means that we don't really understand reality.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that I really lean into. The other thing that I also strongly lean into is into the concept of that consciousness plays a really, really big role into this whole enchilada. More than a lot of people suspect, and I think that is the thing that excites me more nowadays as I grow older. Instead of trying to think, how many alien races are visiting our planet, why they are creating these hybrids. I don't care about that anymore. It bores me. I turned the page into all of that long ago, and I'm very happy that I did.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, well,
I'd like to also add about Robert Anton Wilson. I completely agree. And one of the other things he talked about the BS or belief systems, and one of his maxims, one of his aphorisms was, don't believe anybody else's BS, and don't believe your own BS.
Yeah.
Either. Yep. And that's I have the hardest time. Once you sort of get that and you start to live with that uncertainty that you really, RPJ, you summed it up so very well. It applies to so many aspects of life. And I apologize for throwing this in there, but it's an example that came up recently. Have you guys heard of Pizzagate?
Yes.
But
I haven't really looked. I have not been following it.
Okay, I don't want to get too deeply into it. It's because it's a morass of insanity. But I've watched a lot of people on paranormal, conspiracy, or a couple that I places where I hang out regularly on Facebook and elsewhere get so drawn into that it's as simple as the idea that the hacked John Podesta emails. Clearly they're talking in the emails about like pizza. They're using pizza as something. Now, when I was in high school, we would say, "Hey man, you got any pizza?" And we'd be talking about "Hey, you got any weed?" or or something like that. And so that's the first thing I thought. But out of that has through Reddit and in particular has come that these people are convinced that these guys running these pizza places who are connected to some political people and hold fundraisers, stuff like that, are running these like pedophile, sex trafficking rings with tunnels under Washington, D.C. and stuff. And they've built this case up, with through people's Snapchat, not Instagram images and things people have posted. And what they've done is they've gone in with like this confirmation bias and built this case that when you first look at it seems pretty credible and pretty strong. But what I've but it's gotten so out of hand. Like the owners, these restaurants are getting death threats. I have a friend who knows one of the owners, and by taking up for him, she's been getting death threats, for saying, "Hey man, this is crazy. I know these guys. They're not crazy pedophiles. They're not running, a sex cult, satanic sex cult in the back room of their restaurant, things like this." But what I tried to do with some of these people, I'm like, look, I know you're convinced. I mean, they're so convinced. They're like, they're saying that I'm involved because I'm disagreeing with them, But what I always try to ask people to do, because it's been so helpful to me, is like interrogate yourself. Like try to think, okay, I believe that there's this crazy sex cult, but I'm going to look at every piece of this alleged evidence through the filter that it's not, a satanic pedophile sex cult. And when it's the simplest thing. And Robert Anton Wilson always said things like, look, if you're a liberal and you read, The Nation or, The New Republic, whatever, go out and read the conservative stuff. If you're a UFO believer, read the skeptical. Read what the debunkers are saying. If you believe in Bigfoot, read what the Bigfoot debunkers do, things like that. And it's so important to do that, and to live with it, and to understand that yes, that you need that uncertainty, especially nowadays when it's so easy to like fall into a reality tunnel that's reinforced by all of your social media, the TV shows you watch. I mean, it's so easy to get locked down.
Yeah.
Into your own BS.
Well put on that front, Michael. I completely agree with you, and I wonder how much, to sort of get even a little bit broader with that. I wonder how much hate and ignorance we could avoid in the world by people just taking a step back and wondering if they're wrong. Like, I mean, I had my compass was completely torn in different directions this past election season, but I was struck by how many people were completely sure that they had all the right answers, more so than in years past. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine going through life and being like, well, my way must be the right way, and completely discounting other people's life experiences, other people's perspectives. I mean, because you've got to realize, I mean, it's that tried and true old, walk a mile in a man's moccasin sort of thing. But really, that is the core of what I think will see us through these troubled times, is just admitting the fact that we are all imperfect and that we are seeing things from our perspective, but other people might have really good reasons that in their life make just as much sense as the conclusions that you've reached in yours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the thing is, everybody has a different viewpoint. It doesn't matter. two twins are going to have slightly different experiences, even if they have the same basic genetic makeup. Different things are going to happen to them. Different things are going to affect them to the point where, they may have most things in common, but there's going to be things that aren't. And when you have two completely different people who have had completely different life experiences, completely different genetics, completely different everything, there's no reason to believe that one person's reality is more valid than another's. Mm-hmm. It's all what you've seen, what's happened to you, what you've experienced, what you've learned. The ability to shake off that certainty is what's so difficult. Mm-hmm. Because if you get screwed over every step of your life, you're going to start thinking everyone's out to get you. Everyone's a bad person, and you have to kind of, return. You got to kind of defend yourself in that world. And so you start behaving like that, and then that just enforces the idea that everyone's out to get you because they're reacting to your defensiveness. Mm-hmm. And that's, I had an analogy I liked, which is you buy a plot of land, and it's like a square mile of land, and it's full of trees and stuff. And you initially look at it maybe on Google Maps, and you say, yeah, it looks like a pretty good piece of land. I'll take it. And, initially you feel like, well, yeah, I got a pretty good grasp of it. I looked at it from above on Google Maps. And then one day you walk around the outskirts of it and you feel like, well, I know a little more now. I know what this is all about. And then one day you walk straight through the middle of it and you come across like a small dwelling that you couldn't see from Google Maps or the outside. And you say, oh, there's a building in here. And each step you take looking into this land more, you learn different things. There's no point where you will know it 100% because you can't know what it's been through in time. You don't know what's underneath it necessarily unless you just start digging. But it's kind of like reality. You never know everything that's there, and it's all a matter of perspective. And it's like once we can make kind of a circle with things where we think we have a grasp, we think we understand it, and we don't necessarily understand it. We just understand it from that perspective. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it totally does. That's a good way to look at it.
Someone else coming by is going to notice different things, especially, if someone comes by and they're an expert on trees, they're going to focus in on the trees on the property that you probably didn't notice much about because you're not a tree person. Mm-hmm. And that property says something completely different to them. All right. Shall we hit one more? You guys up for one more?
Yeah.
All right. And this kind of links into what we were just talking about a little. What are all the people seeing in the crypto field? Is it mainly misidentification, or are people really seeing some high number of strange creatures in the jungles and forest?
Well, I suspect that there is probably a lesser amount of misidentification in the cryptozoology field than there is in the ufology field.
True.
I think a lot of us have a lot more experience seeing animals, even in zoos and on nature programs, than we do seeing anything in the sky. But especially, unorthodox aircraft or atmospheric phenomena that would be easily misidentified.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Very good point.
I think with certain things like Bigfoot, there could be two things going on. There could be an actual physical creature, and there could be a phenomena that mimics that creature.
Yeah, that's the bandwagon that I've been on for the last little while. Yeah.
But when you get to some of these really weird crypto creatures, there's no way these things actually exist in a flesh and blood, two other creatures like it birthed it and then it grew up. I mean, it's just not, you have things that simply can't exist. And these things obviously exist in some kind of in-between realm because they do leave physical prints at times. Sometimes people get physically attacked by them. They're obviously not misidentifications, but we can't identify what they are. And I think that's where our brains kind of say, I can't understand this energy I'm seeing. We'll call it a monster.
Yeah. And it's interesting though, because like there are a good deal of cryptozoological creatures which seem to be relics of some variety. Usually, presumed extinct animals that are hanging around, and that seems to be like sort of the go-to answer for a lot of cryptozoology. But there are some other possibilities, like the one that you just suggested, Soraya, that I think need to be entertained, but also some even weirder ones. I mean, you look at the way that the chupacabra phenomena really evolved in Puerto Rico, seemingly springing from whole cloth. there's not really a vibrant chupacabra tradition in Puerto Rico prior to the mid 90s, I believe.
Not necessarily, because there was these legends of vampires, from the 1970s. So there is reason to believe that the phenomenon is somewhat cyclical.
Oh, SmackDown. Okay, fine. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I guess what okay. So let's dial that back a little bit. It seems to me that cultural perceptions, though, do play an interest with how often these things get noticed. I mean, the chupacabra thing did gain a lot of a foothold in the 90s in a similar way to the way that the Dogman thing has gained a foothold in recent years, I think. You didn't really hear about these cases all that often prior to the early 2000s. And then since then, it feels like, everybody's got a Dogman story nowadays. So I wonder if there isn't some sort of self-reinforcing quality that the sort of cultural meme sort of takes hold and perpetuates people seeing something legitimate, but that isn't necessarily like a relict, presumed extinct species.
Any thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, my study of cryptids is is pretty meager compared to you guys. But yeah, I see it as a general, is just another aspect of whatever the thing behind it all is. My only cryptid experience, I saw something that looked like a kangaroo in the middle of Baltimore once with my roommate at the time, and I still can't quite figure. I know there were no kangaroos on the loose. I actively went searching for it. It was in a park in the middle of the city, and damn if it wasn't like a kangaroo. So, but I have no idea. Was it was it something that took that pattern? Did I see an animal that just was hopping like a kangaroo? I don't know. But I really defer to you guys, but the way I look at it is it's just like you said, there's probably a real aspect of biological creatures to some of these, and in some cases it's more of a middle ground event, and ultimately I think it's probably tied to everything else, all the other paranormal manifestations, and just at that particular point it takes the shape of some kind of weird animal.
Yeah, no, those are all good points, and I think it's important to remember too that there's a large unseen chunk of cryptozoology that is very unsexy, that deals with types of frogs that are reported in local folklore that show up in meat markets, and then there's a new species of frog, and nobody really cares about that. But in that sense, I mean, I'm sorry, the pop culture doesn't really care about that. But in that sense, cryptozoology is a very real and vibrant thing that is literally seeing new species brought into the fold every single day. If anybody's interested in sort of that angle, which is after some time that becomes more interesting to me in some ways, Carl Schuker is a guy who has written a couple of books and has a great blog that really covers some of these, obscure things that even I had never heard of, like certain species of snakes that were rumored that tended to have attributes of other snakes, and just some really interesting things that aren't the 5-star headline cryptids that we all hear about.
Okay, and in connection with that, also, why are orbs or lights often seen at night during strange creature sightings? And this is something I actually talked with my guest when we're recording this in the future, but if you're listening to this in the past Saturday, I had Timothy Renner on talking about Beyond the Seventh Gate, which is a lot of weird experiences in southern central Pennsylvania. And we talk about this very thing, like how these lights appear a lot of times with Bigfoot encounters and stuff like that. And I think myself that this is probably because these things are part of the same phenomena, or it's something in the environment that makes these things visible, allows us to have these encounters, and maybe the lights are a side effect of that.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And I think this is the part of the podcast where I say that we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that the pineal gland is sensitive to light. I don't know if there's any real connection there, but I think that's a compelling little tidbit.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, my own personal history of seeing lights in my room when I was a kid, I have no doubt influenced, why I'm on this show right now. Why I've always been drawn to this stuff, and I write about it in my fiction. Even my fiction is about balls of light. So whatever it is, it's haunted me all my life, and maybe using the word haunted is even correct. If it's a spiritual phenomenon, if it's some kind of spirit entities that these lights are, I mean, that's certainly supported by folklore and all kinds of spiritual traditions going back to, to prehistory, probably. So yeah, the lights, that's I think in a lot of respects the lights are what ties all of this stuff together, and maybe they're like the phenomenon behind all of it. Maybe that's really, that's UFOs, and we've got Bigfoot sightings associated with lights, and spiritual manifestations as lights. So yeah, just like we've said probably dozens of times on the show, it's that there's something behind it all, and I think maybe the light phenomena is what comes closest to the source,
or at least a key to the source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's an excellent point, Michael, because sometimes I wonder if these lights that we're seeing, I mean, you think about what a bright light looks like, it almost looks like a blank. Sometimes I wonder if it's not a placeholder for the actual thing that we're seeing.
Ooh,
it's almost like again, like this placeholder for something that we can't interpret otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's a hole.
Yeah.
That the light shines through, instead of an actual orb, we think of it as an orb. Maybe it's more of just a hole.
or the tricksters on the other side spinning a roulette wheel to see which creature you're going to get to see.
That's great. Or like, Valet's metaphor of the projector.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, everybody's watching the movie. I want to get up and turn around and look and see. I want to look at the projector. I want to see the light coming from the projection booth and see what's going on in there.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts, RPJ?
Yeah, like Joshua was talking earlier, there are different subgenres within cryptozoology. There is the unsexy cryptozoology, which is about species which went extinct are probably, there are still a few specimens, roaming around here and there. Like, for example, this woodpecker, this woodpecker bird that I think there was a species that went extinct in North America, and some people maintain that there are still a few specimens alive today. And there's also the case of the thylacine in Australia, and another example of, maybe something that is starting to get a little bit sexier, this marsupial that was brought to extinction by Australian colonies, and some people claim that there are still a few members of the species roaming around in Tasmania. And then there is the really sexy cryptozoology, which deals with the big boys of the field, which is the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, the Yeti. We don't talk about the Yeti much nowadays,
Yeah,
for
that's a
some
good
reason.
point. Yeah, it's sort of faded from popular consciousness in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Bigfoot and Nessie are the big boys. And Nessie is something... Nessie is messy. On the one hand, when I was a kid, the idea of that there was some kind of a plesiosaur, living in a lake in Scotland was so appealing, so romantic, kind of like, the idea that there was this like lost world, that's still clinging to the mother one. But now the reports become scarcer and scarcer, and less striking. I remember how you read accounts of people encountering Nessie not in the lake, but in the road, crossing the road.
Yeah.
Like blocking the highway that was built. I think it was in the 1930s, 1933 or something like that, and that's when a lot of people started to encounter this animal that they equated to had the skin of an elephant, but it had a very small head attached to a serpent-like neck. And what happened with all those reports of Nessie, seen out of the water? Why don't we hear about that anymore? So I don't know. Nick Redfern, this year released a book. Strangely enough, with Nick, about the Loch Ness monster and its paranormal connections, and the whole thing with Aleister Crowley and the lore of the Kelpie, and all these people who started to figure out or to suspect that there was something more about this creature than just a remnant of a plesiosaur or a giant eel. I don't know. Like I said, I still think that consciousness plays a role into all of these. And maybe if you go into the forest and suddenly you encounter a 3-foot tall ape, maybe that shock is strong enough that you enter an altered state of consciousness. And that's why, then people report that the creature vanishes. Maybe that's because the witness is in such a state of altered consciousness, that then they stop perceiving the creature, or they perceive it differently than what it really is. So
that's a magnificent point.
Yes.
Miguel, and it makes me sad, because if anybody out there thinks that ufology has been very apprehensive to adopt ideas regarding consciousness or anything like that, the cryptozoology crew is the last group of people that'll be on that bandwagon.
Oh yeah.
They are the nuts and boltiest people, the nuts and bolts. And look, and I get it, like that's a sensible place to start from, but after so many years of hitting, banging our heads against the wall, it's time to look into some other possible options, at least entertain some other options. But the cryptozoology crew is going to be the last group of people that's going to start entertaining the consciousness model.
Yeah. True.
Okay. Well, any last thoughts, guys, on any of this stuff?
Yeah, I had one thing that popped into my head, and that was the question of, how do you avoid going crazy? How do you avoid losing your grip with all this stuff? And I think part of it is what we're doing right now. What Timothy Leary said, find the others. Yep. You find other people like this show, lots of other podcasts, things like that, where people could talk about this stuff intelligently and debate and not always agree. That to me, finding other agnostic believers, like I think you said earlier, Josh, which was great, is key, and keeping conversations like this going, where we, speculate and riff off each other and listen to each other and learn different ways of looking at things. That's what keeps me kind of sane, because you can only take so long hanging with the true believers before you really do start to lose your cookies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would also say it's important to ground yourself with something that is not this stuff.
Oh yeah.
Because some people get so obsessed with it's all they think about, and I myself like to, like some fun, dumb things that just kind of, release any of that stress, release, just stress in general sometimes. So, I mean, getting stuff that's as far on the opposite end of the spectrum as you can, and just kind of lose yourself in that once in a while, it kind of gives you a refreshing return to it when you turn your head back to it.
Like the tuba.
Like,
yeah.
You want to play us that thing you played us before we started recording?
You mean a little
Okay, he got to that so quickly. I'm pretty sure he just wears it all the time.
He sleeps with.
Oh, my secret's out, you guys, my secret's out. No, I am. I'm here in my office, and I have the horn just sitting right here beside the desk from where I was practicing and composing earlier in the day. So, or something
we believe you. All right, guys, this was a great conversation. I thank you all.
Yeah, good to be back after a bit of an absence there.
Absolute great time. So welcome with everybody. It's been far too long.